Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. He wasn't hidden. Kirby Carpenter was right outside his house, but for 2 full days, nobody noticed. The real mystery wasn't where he was, it was how did no one notice? When authorities finally uncovered what was in Kirby Carpenter's yard, that was only the beginning. Investigators built a case. They charged 3 people, then suddenly changed directions, dropping charges, serious charges, and offering deals to some. Now, only one person is fighting this all the way to trial, Jeffrey Spence. Tonight, we are breaking down the shifting timeline, the conflicting testimony, and the decisions that prosecutors made behind closed doors. We'll talk about what happened in the first trial, and that's right, there's going to be a second one. And we're going to be asking the question, are the right people being held accountable? So, welcome everybody tonight, and special shout out to our first 5 in tonight's chat: Oklahoma Gigi, Michelle B, S Cipher 777, Bonbon RPH, and Terry Abbott. On December 2nd of 2022, and I'm going to adjust this just a little, a distraught woman called the 911 operator in Tippah County, Mississippi. 33-year-old Caitlin Spence hysterically told police that she had just found her boyfriend or her boyfriend's body. The 911 operator tried to calm Caitlin down and immediately dispatched officers to help. Police arrived at the scene, and what they found was extremely disturbing, and it made no sense. Next to the driveway of the house was a body and of 36-year-old Kirby Carpenter lying next to the driveway. Already that was strange, but Kirby's body was covered by a curtain, and on top of the curtain sat an entire toolbox, a large toolbox. And then on the ground, leading up to where Kirby had been left, were drag marks, which raised the question, where and how did Kirby die? The how was answered pretty quickly when police lifted the curtain. They saw what the medical examiner would later confirm: a gunshot wound to the right chest, shotgun trauma to the neck and the chest. The autopsy stated the obvious: it was a homicide, but Kirby did not have any drugs or alcohol in his system. Now, having found the body, police started to look around the scene. Kirby's truck was about 30 feet away in the carport, and it was locked. Through the window, police could see groceries and the keys to the truck, which were inside the locked truck. Before we dive further into this case, I would really appreciate it if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help with the algorithm. Now, Kirby could no longer speak for himself, so police turned to the electronic evidence. Caitlin said that when she left for work on the morning of November 30th, Kirby was still in bed, alive. That evening, she texted him about dinner. At 6:37 p.m., he replied with 2 question marks. That was the last text message on Kirby's phone, so police concluded he probably died that night. Caitlin finally got back home at 8:30 p.m. that same night, bearing Chinese food, but she found the house was dark and locked up. Kirby wasn't there. Caitlin did not seem to be alarmed. She didn't call or text Kirby, and she didn't call 911. In fact, Caitlin seemed remarkably unworried, particularly for the mother of a newborn. I know when I had a newborn, I definitely would have noticed and been pretty upset if my husband, George, had disappeared and just failed to come home one night. But Caitlin apparently was made of much sterner stuff than I am. Kirby did not make it home all that night, day or night, on December 1st. Caitlin seemed to be managing fine. She still didn't call 911. Finally, on December 2nd, Caitlin said she decided to go out to the deer stand looking for Kirby. I don't know, maybe she thought he had been hunting for a couple of days, but Caitlin found Kirby right outside the house. She called 911 on December 2nd to say that she had just discovered his body outside the house. She called and let her parents, Jeff and Karen Smith, know the terrible news, and they headed over to Virginia to be there for her. Now, I say they headed to Mississippi, but in fact, Jeff and Karen were really headed back to Mississippi because they had just been at Caitlin's and Kirby's house just days before. They drove from Virginia to see their daughter and their brand new grandbaby. And Caitlin's mom, Karen, was the perfect person to help with the baby since she was a former school nurse. Now, Jeff and Karen visited over the Thanksgiving holiday, but they left on November 29th, the day before police concluded that Kirby Carpenter had been killed. So I have a quick timeline for you. So this is basically, and can I make that any bigger? I don't think I can. We'll have to go with, I can. Okay, there we go. So in 2020, Kirby and Caitlin met of all places at a Tractor Supply store, that romantic location. And then July 2022, Kirby and Caitlin had their child. In November, Caitlin's parents, Jeff and Karen Spence, visited for Thanksgiving. On November 29th, Jeff and Karen left to return to Virginia, where they lived. And on November 30th, Kirby Carpenter was killed, at least according to the state's theory. And on December 2nd, Caitlin called 911 to report finding the body. Now, police, let me pull that out. Police who knew Kirby, people who knew Kirby, knew he regularly carried large amounts of cash. Sure enough, when the police searched Kirby's body, they found a large amount of cash in the pocket, which raised a host of questions. One key question was, why would someone kill Kirby and leave the money? Did this mean that Kirby was targeted for a reason that had nothing to do with money? It wasn't the only puzzle, because Kirby was also known to carry a mysterious satchel stuffed with papers. He carried that satchel pretty much everywhere he went, and that satchel was not with Kirby when police found the body. Investigators turned their sights to the scene of the crime, and they were relieved to discover that Kirby had a blinked security system. They were hoping to find the killer. Maybe even the crime itself had been recorded by the system. But when investigators checked, they discovered, to their surprise, that it had not captured anything during the time frame around the murder. And it was another dead end for them in a bundle of dead ends. Investigators broadened their search and started sifting through Kirby Carpenter's life, trying to figure out who might want him dead. They started mapping his money, which was actually not an easy task because Kirby Carpenter had multiple businesses. He sold liquor, he worked in real estate, he dabbled in the music world, he collected coins and guitars, but his most lucrative business may have been under the table because his girlfriend, Caitlin, testified that he was a drug dealer. Could that explain the fact that Kirby carried a good deal of cash, a satchel for paperwork, and, as we were told in the trial, a pistol, just in case? Now, word spread quickly that Kirby's body had been found, and according to police, people began descending on Kirby's house. And even while police said they were busy processing the scene, multiple people were removing property right while the police were working. People were removing, for example, police said, bags of silver and valuables, and no one even knew exactly what. Police claimed that Caitlin and her parents, Karen and Jeff, took items, that Kirby's mother took items. And ironically, as you will hear later, this little section compared to the murder of Kirby of people taking property became very important in the prosecution of one of the three people. Now, police became concerned that this was starting to look more like a free-for-all and not like a controlled crime scene anymore. So to try to get control of it, police called Kirby's estate attorney, a man named Bart Adams. And Adams came to the scene and was shocked to find the house in what he said he believed was hoarder's condition, that there were valuables stacked everywhere. Rooms and garages packed with valuables and guns and safes and trailers and clutter. Now, Bart Adams was saddled with trying to figure out who got what, and he ran smack into a huge problem. He could not find a will for Kirby. If Kirby died without a will, that meant his estate would go to his two children. Kirby had one child with Caitlin, but he also had a child from a prior relationship. As he sorted everything out, Adams named Kirby's mother as a trustee and told everyone to return what they had taken from the house. Then Attorney Adams needed a place to store all of Kirby's valuables. He put them in the old Mississippi National Guard vault, figuring they would be safe there, surely. But in January, someone cut the power to the armory, damaged windows, and broke in. Adams did not think anything had been stolen, but eventually he moved all of the items to his law office. But that very night, the night he moved everything to his office, someone broke in and stole some of the items. He had not even had a chance to inventory the items yet, and Adams was not sure how much was lost. He estimated $3,000, $4,000 was gone. All told, Kirby's estate came out to $1.5 million, but Adams testified that he was frankly shocked at how little cash and gold there was. Meanwhile, police were trying to figure out who killed Kirby. Police were suspicious of Caitlin, but they were also suspicious of her father. Jeff Spence had supposedly been in Virginia at the time that Kirby was killed, but police investigated him anyway. They searched his silver Cadillac and found $17,000 in cash wrapped in tin foil. Police also found the keys to a storage unit and a safe deposit box. They found more cash, plus some coins, wills, and perhaps most bizarrely, counterfeit money, like the fakey kind, like you would use as a prop. Police had their suspicions, but they had to admit that there was no way to determine when or how Jeff Spence came to possess those items. Those items could have belonged to Jeff Spence for years. There was no way to prove any of those items had ever belonged to Kirby Carpenter. And for that matter, even if the items had belonged to Kirby Carpenter, they didn't prove that Jeff Spence had anything to do with Kirby's death. Authorities asked Karen Spence if the couple owned any guns, and she said they did not. But when police searched the Spence home, they in fact found a shotgun. They also found yet more cash wrapped in tin foil. A lieutenant with the sheriff's office explained that if you bury cash wrapped in tin foil, that will make it possible for you to find it later using a metal detector. So there you go, life lesson if you ever need to bury all of your cash in your backyard. Police concluded that the Spences had murdered Kirby. The prosecutor presented the case to a grand jury, and Jeff, Karen, and Caitlin were all indicted on capital murder charges. Now, capital murder is the most serious charge there is. It means that the prosecution believes that it was not just a murder, if you can call any murder just a murder, but that there were also aggravating factors that made the murder even worse. In most states, that means that the person charged with the crime is being tried for either the death penalty or life without parole. So these were very serious charges against all three, not just Jeff Spence, all three. And that's why what happened next will shock you. A grand jury indicted Caitlin, as I said, as well as her parents, Jeffrey and Karen Spence, for capital murder, 2 counts of grand larceny, and conspiracy. But in April of 2025, Caitlin struck a very generous plea deal with prosecutors. Prosecutors agreed to drop the capital murder charge, and Caitlin only pled guilty to 1 count of accessory to murder after the fact, not to murder. Accessory after the fact. That means accessory to murder after the fact means that the person helped the killer after the murder was over. It could be giving the perpetrator a place to hide, or it could be helping to dispose of evidence, giving a false alibi for the killer, things like that. So her sentence has not been finalized yet, but she is expected to receive a 20-year suspended sentence, meaning that she is not going to have to go to prison so long as she meets all the conditions of her probation. So Caitlin went all the way from capital murder to likely receiving a suspended sentence. She will have to wear a GPS monitor and stay in the state of Mississippi. But as part of this sweet deal, Caitlin agreed to testify against her parents, Karen and Jeff Spence. Now, meanwhile, Karen and Jeff edged closer to trial in September of 2025. And what happened next is also going to surprise you, because 4 days before their trial was set to start, Karen Spence entered an Alford plea, but not to murder. She only entered an Alford plea to being an accessory after the fact to grand larceny. So let's break that down, explain a couple of things here. First of all, what's an Alford plea? Well, that means that Karen did not officially plead guilty. She did not admit to anything. In fact, she says she's innocent, but she acknowledges that the state probably had enough evidence to convict her. Defendants who take this plea are basically saying they have to be practical. They need to make a rational choice to take a plea deal for a reduced sentence because it looks very likely that they will be convicted. But no matter what the facts say, the defendant is saying, I didn't do it and I'm innocent. So secondly, let's talk about what Karen entered the Alford plea to. It wasn't to murder or having anything to do with the murder or knowing about it, or even like Caitlin being accessory to it after the fact. Instead, she only pled guilty to being an accessory to grand larceny. And grand meaning a large amount, not just a small amount or something minor. I presume this means to taking the stuff from Kirby's house, but she did not take the Alford plea to actually stealing the money, just to being an accessory to it after it actually happened, which means that she aided, encouraged, or abetted someone else who took Kirby's stuff. So she said she was innocent of helping anybody take Kirby's property, but that the prosecution could probably persuade the jury, so it made sense to go ahead and take a deal. Now, this is a long, long way from murder, and so was the penalty. Karen's sentence was remarkably light, 10 years in prison, suspended in full, meaning she did not actually have to go to prison. And she was put on 5 years of unsupervised probation, meaning she does not have to report. And that's a remarkable difference. She was indicted for capital murder and ended up with no prison time at all and doesn't even have to report during her probation. And then there was one. Jeff Spence stood trial all alone. His wife didn't testify, but his daughter Caitlin took the stand against him. Now, Caitlin Spence was the state's star witness because she testified that her dad admitted he had come back to Mississippi after the Thanksgiving visit and before she let them know Kirby had been killed. He said he came back to leave a package of pills for Kirby. He left them under a 5-gallon bucket, and Jeff suggested to Caitlin that maybe the people picking up those drugs were the ones who had killed Kirby. Now, Jeff refused to give Caitlin any details. Let's take a listen to what her testimony at trial was about this.
If he had anything to do with Kirby's death, I asked him if what some of the things that I was hearing was true. He turned aggressive and very short with me in his answers. He said that it wasn't my job to find, who Kirby's killer was, that Enola was my only responsibility. He said that he did what he had to do, that the less I knew, the better. He said He said that I shouldn't lick a gift horse in the mouth.
So Caitlin testified that her father, Jeff, warned her against speaking up and told her what would happen if she did that is she would lose her child. Caitlin said she took this to mean that Jeff had actually killed Kirby and was confessing to her. Here's what she said.
How did you take this conversation with respect to Kirby's death?
That he was confessing to me that he had killed Kirby.
Okay.
Please say it again.
That he was confessing to me that he had killed Kirby.
He said that to you.
That's how I took our conversation.
Your interpretation.
Your Honor, I
Wait a
object.
minute, you'll have your time. Kevin objects, but you'll have your time for asking questions.
Well, you just got through
In
telling
the
us.
first 10 years before he
Okay, let's go ahead and stop it there. So that there was an objection there from the defense that came a little bit on the late side. Lawyers have to make their objections at trial in front of the trial judge. If you don't, then the appellate court will say that the trial court wasn't given a fair chance to make the decision about whatever you were complaining about. So the theory is you want to push lawyers to make their objections right away so they can be dealt with at the first trial. You don't want to have to go back to a second trial if you can avoid it. So in this case, I believe, and it's hard to hear in these segments, but I believe what was happening was there was an objection to the question about how she interpreted his confession, because often that would be something reserved for the jury. But I don't think this would have been a significant matter anyway. And I imagine the court would have overruled that objection no matter when it came. So one of the biggest pieces of evidence against Jeff Spence was pretty controversial. The state introduced a group text from 2021, the year before Kirby was killed. Caitlin was talking about opening up a business, and she was asking the group what business she should open. And her dad texted Assassins Inc. The older I get, the less life in prison is a deterrent. And obviously, that's not your typical dad joke. That's shocking, but more than that, it's kind of alarming that he's joking. Assassins Inc. The older I get, the less life in prison is a deterrent. But in closing arguments, the defense argued all this was a joke, an unfortunately worded attempt at humor. And here's what they said. And this is nothing more than foolishness, playfulness, foolishness between a parent and a daughter. That's all it is. There's no sadness, never will be. There's no business that they're in together. This is just foolishness. So Lawyer Lee's view, what does that joke have to do with a murder that occurred a year later? I'm actually surprised that the state got that particular evidence in. It had no real use other than to suggest that Jeff Spence was a dangerous kind of a guy. In law, we call that character evidence, and usually it's not allowed in at trial. The idea is that if just because someone has bad character doesn't mean that they committed this particular crime. You could be a completely rotten person. Well, obviously not you. You're watching this video, but someone you dislike could be a completely rotten person and still not have committed this particular crime. And in this case, for example, Jeff Spence could be a truly dangerous, terrible person and still not be the person who killed Kirby Carpenter. So our justice system doesn't punish people for being bad people in general. The justice system can only punish people for things they actually have done, and not just in general because they're bad. So I'm actually surprised that this text chain came into evidence. It will not surprise you to hear that the defense lit into Caitlin. She talked about a confession her dad had made beside a waterfall as they were taking a walk, but she didn't say anything about it until 2 years after her dad supposedly made it, which coincided with a very important time. Let's hear the questioning on that.
turned even 30.
You just got through telling us that he was selling drugs out of the house where you live.
That is correct.
So he was a drug dealer after you met him.
Correct.
So drug dealing was apparently his seed money.
Kirby did a lot of different things to earn his money.
Including selling drugs, including, you acknowledge selling drugs.
Yes, sir.
Including running guns. So the waterfall story happened in April, May or June of 23.
Correct.
4 to 5 months, 4 to 5 to 6 months after this tragic event involving your boyfriend, right?
Yes, sir.
So it took you from April of 23 to April of 25 to change your story. 2 years.
I did not. I was, after our conversation at the waterfall, I was very intimidated by my father. I was very upset with him. I did not feel like I could come forward. I believed that when we were arrested, that my father would come forward and tell the truth. And I did not want to have to be testifying against him.
Defense was making 2 points here. The first point was that Jeff was in Virginia when Kirby was killed, that Caitlin had written this text message. Caitlin's mother, Karen, had written a text message to Caitlin saying that he was making hamburgers. Said, Dad and I are eating hamburgers. He just got up from a good nap, worked hard today, inside and out, love you lots. And that was an argument that the defense made. It couldn't have been Kirby who did this. It would be impossible because he was hundreds of miles away in Virginia. Now, they also made the argument that the reason that Caitlin would get up there and argue that her dad had confessed to her beside a waterfall while they were taking a walk was because she wanted a plea deal. She got a sweet plea deal, and the only way she got it was by testifying against her dad. And so that was what they were arguing, what they were arguing to the jury. And then finally, they were arguing that the reason that Kirby would have been attacked by somebody had to do with all of the businesses he had. He sold drugs, they said. He ran guns. Caitlin testified to that. And so he had a lot of people out there who would want to see him dead. Here's, for example, what the defense said in closing argument. Nothing happened at the waterfall. She's making it up. She's making it up to be as plausible as possible. And they also said, I think you need to bear in mind how much animosity Kirby had going on at the time, how much animosity he has generated over the course of his young life, how many people wanted to do him harm, wanted to drag him out to the streets. It was a little more graphic than that. We'll stop there. Of that large group of potential suspects, the defense argued Jeffrey Spence wasn't even in the hunt. After all, he had an alibi, said the defense. Now, Jeffrey Spence's trial was really quick when you consider how serious the charges were. Trial lasted just 4 days, including closing arguments. The jury was split, and not just a little bit. After 3 hours, the jury sent out a note telling the judge they were split 6-6. Now, maybe they should not have disclosed exactly how their vote was running, but it was pretty critical information because what it meant was this split ran deep. This was not a case where nearly everybody was about to vote one way and there was one holdout who was keeping the jury from reaching a verdict. In this case, the jury was literally split down the middle. They were deeply divided. The judge ordered the jurors to get back to work, to keep trying, but after another hour and a half, the jury was still split 6-6. So the judge was forced to declare a mistrial. Now, having a jury that split is pretty unusual. My read is that a jury split that deep indicates that the case the state presented was not at all clear-cut to the jury. For now, Jeff Spence is still in prison and awaiting trial, a new trial, a second trial. And the state does plan to try the case again. That's why Jeff Spence was sent back, remanded to jail. On a retrial, absolutely anything can happen. A new jury might see the evidence completely differently, either in favor of Jeff Spence or in favor of the state. But what makes this case unique, I think, is how split the jury was. Unless one or the other side presents a pretty different case, it suggests that we may wind up with a divided jury again. And maybe it won't be split down the middle this time, but it's more likely to be a hung jury than if the first result had been 11-1. If it had been heavily tilted on one side, that would be different. All right. I want to do some questions, and I see I have some super chats. I was saving everything out to the end, so I'll go through those. I want to ask y'all a question as we go into this. I am curious. Please put in the chat or in the comments. This jury was split down the middle. After hearing just the part of the evidence I presented tonight, do you think the state proved its case? What would your verdict have been? And I also want to ask you, what do you think about the way the state focused on who should be accountable? Prosecutors made deals with two people, Caitlin and Karen. Caitlin and her mother, Karen. Now only one person is standing trial. Do you believe the right person is being held accountable? All right, so I'm curious what y'all will say about that. And I will answer a few questions, but let me head over and say, Pascaline has been a member for 2 months. We are so glad to have you. I should take that out. I can't believe I've been talking all this while with that still in there. Okay, Pascaline, thank you. She joined us during the Adelson trial, so I'm so glad to have you. Thank you very much. Mitt Spunky has been a member for 13 months. That's awesome. Good to have you tonight, Mitt Spunky, and thank you for being a longtime member and for your very generous super sticker. Much appreciated. Jersey Jen, interested in this case. It's a really interesting one. I find it especially interesting because of the deep divide between the jury. That suggests to me that it is a case on a razor thin edge, and I am really curious what happens in trial number 2. Will the state bring more evidence or present it better? Will the defense step up? What will happen? I think there's a lot of suspense around that second trial. So thank you, Jersey Jen. Pascaline's Charlie Adelson made also a bad joke, but he was convicted. Yes, Charlie Adelson did make a bad joke, and he was convicted. You are absolutely correct, Pascaline. Charlie Adelson made a joke about how it was a case that we covered, and he made a joke about how he had decided to buy a TV for his sister Wendy instead of hiring a hitman as a result of what she had just gone through with her divorce as she was getting divorced. So poor joke. And the jury was, let's just say, unimpressed. Hopefully. Okay, good. Neuropsych Zena, thank you for your message that I was muted. And I hopefully am back and everybody can hear me. So hopefully that's the case. Well, let me head over and see if there are any questions over here. And if you have a question, if you would put the question marks at the beginning, I would appreciate it. All right. So yes, later I can cut out the part that's muted. But for now, if you would just skip forward past that, that would be good. Thank you, Mama Pinks, for telling people. All right. And thank you to our mods, as usual. Greatly appreciate them. I am looking for, there we go. Pascaline, why a retrial when you're sure it's going to be the same result? Could save money. And Pascaline has a really good point. A prosecutor does not have to choose to try Jeff Spence or anybody a second time. The prosecutor can say, that just didn't work. It was too close, didn't have enough evidence, 6 and 6, it's not going to work. The prosecutor can walk away from it. Could have walked away from Karen Reed's trial. But the prosecutor has some discretion. They get to make a choice. In this case, they've indicated they plan to move forward. I mean, somebody killed Kirby Carpenter, and the prosecutor believes it was apparently believes it was Jeff Spence. So the reason to do a retrial would be if the prosecutor, I think, would do it is because the prosecutor believes that Kirby Carpenter was killed, murdered by Jeff Spence. They just think that that's true. But it's really critical that they not try exactly the same case again. This one is a really harder one because the jury was so divided. They have got to bring a better, more coherent case next time around if they want to break through that. I think when you've got 6-6, oh, I have that still sitting up. Everyone's like, wait, you're muted. Why does it say that on your screen? Okay, so I think that if the prosecution brings a better, more improved case, they may have another chance. It is a big decision, just like you say, Pascaline, to try somebody again because it's expensive, it's time consuming, and the prosecutor is supposed to constantly ask the question, not just is it possible to convict the person, but is it right to convict the person? Is this the right person? Have I made the right choice? Do I have sufficient evidence? There's an unusual burden, an extra burden on a prosecutor making that choice, making that decision. Okay. All right. I think that we now have, I think I've now answered everybody's questions. Well, I will look forward to seeing you all again on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. See you soon.